Hello and thank you for being here. In this video entitled The Lunation Cycle, I'm going to bring attention to that 29.5 day period from new moon to new moon, otherwise called the transiting moon or the real-time moon. This cycle is very important in astrology in terms of prediction because the new moon occurs in a certain sign at a particular degree and against the backdrop of your natal chart based on your birthday, month, year, place, and time, and it thereby activates a certain evolutionary process each month. That the new moon is in a different degree each month, and or every year will be in a different degree than it was the previous year, shows an important variable as well. So while the moon waxing and waning has a certain standard feature to it, so big deal, the moon waxes and wanes every 29.5 days, so there's nothing overly special about that, it's just common and every day. But when we bring in the astrological focus, and especially the larger backdrop of planets behind it, which is the holistic picture, in other words, it's not purely and solely the new moon by degree, sign, and the house it's in, it's also how it is represented by the larger array of planets in the background, which also means that no two moments or no two new moons are ever the same, because the planets in the background in the solar system are always in motion. So that means that every time there's a new moon, which becomes that base measurement of time, and that's why the moon cycle is the month cycle. I mean, the base measurement of time is a second, a minute, an hour, a day, and that's all very important. But in a larger context, the completion of a cycle, aside from the Earth turning on its axis, the day-night cycle, the lunation cycle is that 1 month cycle, which becomes the basis of the year cycle, the year divided into 12. So this astronomical aspect of understanding the moon is really important. And let me illustrate that a little further before I get more fully into showing you some astrological examples. So the moon orbits the Earth in a 27.32 day period, otherwise called the sidereal month. And this is the moon measured against the backdrop of the stars. So it does in fact complete a cycle in 27.32 days. However, because the Earth in its orbital cycle around the Sun, or what's experienced as the Sun orbiting the Earth, because that it too is in motion, it takes an extra 2.17 days for the moon in effect to catch up to the Earth and thereby create a new cycle. Now, it's always a bit of interesting, tricky language to understand that the moon is catching up, but it's to the Earth. But in fact, from the standpoint of the Earth, where we're experiencing the cosmos, shall we say, from that vantage point, it's in effect catching up to the Sun from our perspective. So a new moon is understood as the conjunction of the Sun and Moon from the Earth's perspective. So now that's illustrated here. What we're seeing here is there's the Earth in the center, and there on the right, of course, is the Sun, and there's the moon. So the moon at new, just as would be true at a solar eclipse, is between the Earth and the Sun. And then it begins to wax over a period of 29.5 days and encompassing what's called an 8-phase process. Now the phases can be divided into 4 main phases initially: the new, the half or first quarter, the full, and the half waning or last quarter moon. And those would be the cardinal points, the north, south, east, west on the compass, where the midpoints, the crescent, then the gibbous, and then the waning gibbous, or otherwise called the disseminating moon, and the last crescent, or the waning crescent, otherwise called the balsamic moon, are the midpoints, which would be by extension sort of the high points of the season. So a new moon corresponds symbolically to winter solstice, and the full moon to summer solstice, and the half waxing moon, or the first quarter, to spring equinox, and the last quarter to autumn equinox. So the midpoints of those periods are the peak points of each season, symbolically speaking. And also they are part of the process of the entire unfoldment. Now, that's going to be illustrated in a moment. I'll bring more clarity to that. So the fact that the moon has an elliptical orbit produces what's a varying rate of speed, moving from 12 to 14 degrees per day. So the moon is never at a constant rate of speed, which is true of most of the planets in their elliptical orbits. The only one that does that the least really is Neptune, but it still does a little. But all planets do. So they're never quite in the same rate of speed at any given moment, which is interesting on its own. It's one of those many variabilities that's both recognized in astronomy and astrology, so it's never really that pat. Where the astronomy, of course, is concerned with the phenomenal factual physics of what we're seeing, astrology takes in the larger holistic meaningfulness of what it implies and recognizes an archetypal evolutionary theme, a deeper psychospiritual process. So getting back to it then, the moon Therefore, in each phase takes 3.5 to 4 days, or 3 3/4 on average, to complete one phase. So here we have what's called a moon phase mandala. This map, or mandala, is used to measure the waxing and waning moon, the lunation cycle. And what it offers is an indication that there's more to that waxing waning process than just a phenomenal event. I mean, we all experience the sun and moon waxing and waning every month, so it's not a big deal. But when we start to bring in the bigger picture, which includes the larger backdrop of planets, but also that we can take that 8-phase cycle and understand it in a more specific way. This is what I refer to as the anatomy of a cycle. So any cycle which is based on the conjunction of any two planets from the standpoint of the Earth in astrology produces a period of time depending on which two planets you're referring to. When it's the sun and moon, the luminaries, it's a 29.5 day cycle. If it was Mercury and Venus, it would be a different time period, and each two planets has a very specific time period during which they complete a cycle. The faster of the two planets pulls ahead and enters into a waxing and thereby waning process over that period of time. So that's the anatomy of a cycle. Now, the cycle more specifically can be understood to undergo a new phase, which would be phase 1, then a crescent phase, phase 2, then a first quarter, phase 3, then a gibbous, a full moon phase, a disseminating phase, a last quarter phase, and a balsamic. So in astrology, we give a very specific name to each phase because they're recognized as very particularly different each from the other. So if the new moon here is symbolic of winter solstice, begins a new cycle, this period here, where there's an emergence, a germination, a rebirth, vision, symbolically speaking, these are words that explain what this particular phase is about, where there's a generation of a tone and something of a struggle from the past, from the previous cycle. Now, then it enters into an expansion phase where there's sprouts and momentum and foundation. Now, when we say sprouts and buds, what's happening here is we're using an organic process to illustrate what's going on in the waxing and waning. So the moon cycle itself is only 29.5 days, but when we relate the cycle itself to a larger year cycle, where we get the 4 seasons, we can better understand why these terms are used. So it's important to be in astrology, understand the symbolic implications. So if we use an excessively literal interpretation, we might not understand how any cycle can be used as a base measurement. So in other words, the lunation cycle, the waxing and waning moon, is the basis for the year cycle, and so forth. So when that's understood, then you can more fully and clearly understand any two planets have a specific period of time, otherwise known as their synodic cycle, from the conjunction, which in terms of the sun and moon would be the new moon, or the conjunction of any two planets would complete a cycle in a certain particular period of time. Okay, so now we can therefore understand each phase as having a particular theme, and they're distinct. I'll keep it short for now. One could spend quite a lot of time examining what's going on here in terms of the deeper understanding, and of course books have been written on that to understand each phase and the deeper implications of them. But most importantly, we understand that the lunation cycle, broken down into 8 phases, each of which has a distinct quality or significance, is the main point to take away here. And the new outer rim there, we can see here more specifically an emergence phase, an expansion phase, an action phase, an overcoming, fulfillment, demonstration, reorientation, and release. You can see these terms more psychologically, whereas these are less, they're more image or a phenomenon. These represent a process. So there's an organic correspondence symbolically in this process, but this represents more of a process of development. So it's, again, what we would refer to as a psychospiritual developmental process, an evolutionary theme that's measured in this archetype. So that's the basis of understanding this. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring you over to an astrology chart, and I'll give you some examples there. Okay, so here we are looking at an actual basic chart. This chart is based on, it's called a natural zodiac chart, where Aries is at 0 degrees and each house cusp is at 0 degrees. This is the base template for the zodiac wheel in astrology. Now, on January 17th in Greenwich, I use Greenwich as the place for the date line for the beginning of the day, so we can refer to any place and we'd have a different time when a new moon occurs depending on the time zone, etc. So I always use Greenwich because it represents a generic start point for us all, for the planet. Okay, now the new moon on January 17th in England on 2018, January 17th, 2018 was at, the new moon was at, as a matter of fact, this is a bit off. I'm just going to change something here. It's going to be useful anyway because I'm going to show you a process of the moon, how much it moves per beat. So each beat here, you're going to see the moon moving backwards. So if you look at the degree of the moon here, notice it's going backwards. So what we have, you'll notice here, is this is a tool used to measure the rate of speed and motion of a planet. It's used for many different aspects of decipherment in astrology. It's an important and valuable tool in my work. So here the moon currently is at 23 degrees 56. So if we advance it, notice exactly the degrees, 23:56. We advance it 1 hour, it goes 24:26. So you get that it goes about half a degree per hour. And then 23, 24, 26, then 24:55, then we go to another hour, 25:25 in this case, then another hour, 25:55. So the moon by each hour is creeping closer and closer to the sun. Now here we have what's called the exact new moon that occurred on January 17, 2018 at 2:17 a.m. in Greenwich. So there's the sun and moon at 26:54 respectively. By the way, the Earth here, this is the symbol of the Earth, is always the exact opposite point of the sun. So that's important consideration, but I'll explain that more at a later time. So we have the new moon, and without any other backdrop, so it occurs at a certain degree in a certain sign. 26 degrees 54 Capricorn is the basic understanding here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a larger backdrop of this new moon against the planets. All right, here we show here's that new moon, the sun moon conjunction, but what you're seeing in this chart, same time, same date, same place, is all the other planets and how the new moon no longer is purely an isolated event, but it happens within a larger context. This is the beginning of a holistic understanding. This is the way horoscopes are written, for example, but also when the new moon occurs in our natal chart, it activates a theme of development for that particular month, that 29.5 day month, the synodic month. But here in this case, we have the new moon in Capricorn with Venus very closely aligned at 28 degrees 46, so just shy of a couple of degrees ahead, and Pluto's behind it. And there's a whole discussion of which planet is behind versus in front and so forth, which is the most elevated planet. There's all kinds of small factors that play a vital role in the greater interpretation. But the main point that you want to take away here is that the new moon occurs in context to all the other planets. And these are the aspects between them. These are the houses. They're the signs that they're in. And these are the degrees. Now, there's only 30 degrees in a sign. So, sometimes people get a little intimidated by the numbers, the math of it, But it's actually, there can never be a planet more than 30 degrees. So even at 26:54 minutes, it's close to the end of that sign of Capricorn. All right, so I'm going to stop that, and what I'm going to do is take this exact chart and put it against the backdrop of somebody, and then we'll get an example of seeing it against, somebody's actual chart. Okay, now, so this is the birth chart of our Prime Minister in Canada, Justin Trudeau. His birthday just so happens to be on Christmas Day, December 21st, 1971, 9:27 p.m. in Ottawa, and his chart shows a Capricorn moon. That's part of the reason I chose him, but I also want to choose somebody famous and known at least to a wide audience, and to provide an example. I'm not going to go into any of the nitty-gritty details of our Prime Minister's chart, but I just want to illustrate how the new moon for him occurred in what would be Capricorn, of course, at 26 degrees. That was true for all of us. That's the generic, but this is where the houses play a role. Now, this is his ascendant, 3 degrees Virgo, and the degree of and sign of the new moon precisely was in the 5th house, okay? And I asked myself, is there any aspects that the new moon is making to the natal chart? And the first answer is yes, to the career line, the midheaven. So this implies a certain creative flow for him from the standpoint of that particular event, that new moon. Also, the new moon is in a sextile to Mars, and those are the two main aspects I saw. One could use smaller aspects, and there's main aspects, or called major, and there's minor aspects. We're just going to stick with some major aspect perspectives, but in later videos I'll show you more minor aspect considerations, okay? There's so many layers and details to share, so we have to break it into parts. So the main point here is that we get an example of a new moon occurring with all the other planets in context to it. It becomes the focal point, and all the other planets are in context, supporting it as backdrop themes, or the larger whole of development that's occurring in this new moon. Okay, that's the intricacy of it and the real takeaway to understand. So, and the aspects it's making and the house it's in activates a certain theme for him. Now, how he will respond to that, how it will unfold in his life, is a variable according to the specifics of his life. So that's where we always understand that every case must be judged on its own ground. Now, if we were doing this for just every sign of the zodiac, as with horoscopes, well, you can get a generic perspective, which really is valid and surprisingly works. And there's a reason why it works, but I'm not going to explain that right now. It is based on archetypal principles and holism, by the way, but specifically now we're referring to that exact degree and sign of the new moon that just occurred back on January 27th, 2018. And as a final measure, what I'm going to do is take you through an illustration of the moon in its motion from new moon to new moon. Okay, in this example of the previous new moon that occurred back in January of 2018, what we're seeing is the moon approaching new. So I'm going to go initially by increments of 1 hour once again, just to quickly watch the degree of the moon specifically, moving about 12 to 14 degrees per, about half a degree per click per hour. Okay, so you'll notice it takes 2 clicks for it to move to the next degree. So recognize that it takes about a couple hours to complete 1 degree, and that's where that 12 to 14 degree rate of motion over the course of a 24-hour period is understood. Okay, a bit of math just to divide that, enough to understand the rate of motion of the moon. So now that's the moon just entered Capricorn there. As a matter of fact, I'll go back and show, just at a certain time on that day prior, as the moon waxes it's waning in its process. When I say waxing, I mean approaching. The moon here is always in reference to the sun. The new moon occurs when the sun-moon conjunction occurs, so the moon, being the faster planet, is therefore considered the waxing and waning planet. So it's waning towards a new moon here. So we're going to actually change it to 1 week at a time now. Okay, so, not 1 week, but 1 day. So what you're seeing me do here is using this tool, showing a rate of motion of 1 click per day. So see that 12-degree jump in 1 day. Now watch the next one. See that 24? So it went from 12 to 24. That's that approximately 12 to 14 day period. So now that it's close, it'll jump too far. So what I'll do is I'll go back to hours, and I'm going to I'm going to just click a few times, and it's going to bring me to the moment when, just so happens it did it exactly. At exactly 2:17 a.m. on January 17th in Greenwich, England, there was a new moon. Now what I'll do is I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to show you it against the backdrop of the larger planets, and I'm actually going to put it in real time with the house cusps as well. Okay, actually I decided not to use the specific house cusp for that location. We're just still using the Aries chart, the archetypal foundational chart, because there's too many layers and it's too much to grasp all at once. Okay, what we're going to do here is, once again, we have the larger context, all the planets. There's the moon prior to new, and I'm going to proceed at rate of 1 degree, 1 hour per click. So watch the moon here. Now what you're also going to notice is how much can occur in an hour, not entirely regarding all the planets in motion, but watch this aspects change at least to some extent. Okay, so the planets ever so slightly, the house cusps are not moving, but the moon is moving, and each hour there's motion, and it's specifically that of the moon. But what you're also seeing is the midheaven. The midheaven itself is showing in this chart, and it advances to the midheaven is based on the Earth turning. So you get this angular rate of change. So there's the moon. You see the aspects, the ascendant and the midheaven are depicted in this chart, and they're moving, and that's showing, that's the value of understanding the angles. That's the sort of the meridian of the Earth itself turning on its axis, and that's where we get into the importance and understanding of angles. It's not what I exactly intended to show you, but now that it shows up, it plays an important role to consider, that it's not just the planets in astrology, it's the angles as well. So there we go, the moon moving and the angles, so the aspects are changing according to the angles. And that would be the difference between, by the way, the hour that you're born in any given day. Just a little extra takeaway here, that that's why what day and place and so forth you're born on at is really important. But what time was it is the finer tuning of astrology. An astrology chart reading can be done without knowing that time, but knowing specifically helps a lot to refine and get to the very finer details. It could be described as higher pixelated, clearer picture. So a couple more clicks and we're going to see the moon moving still by degree. If you watch it, not just the ascendant midheaven moving, but watch the moon up there, and a few more clicks by each hour, and it progresses towards that new moon in Capricorn. Now actually I just jumped past it there. So there it goes. It's just past new moon here, but it gives you the example of the new moon occurring with the context of all the other planets. The angle of the midheaven and the ascendant is the Earth turning while each angle each hour advances forward. The ascendant midheaven axis, the angles in astrology move rather quickly. So this is where it plays a really vital role. And if we were to actually use other than an Aries chart, you would see the planets appear to move. As a matter of fact, I just might do that for one final illustration. No, I'm going to leave that one alone this time because it's too much. I think you've learned enough. Today, what I've shown you is that the lunation cycle from new moon to new moon plays a really important role. As a matter of fact, I will show you one final bit here. What we're going to do is move from this new moon to the next new moon, and we're going to advance by 1 week at a time. So watch the moon jump quite significantly. See, it jumped 1 quarter turn for, it's 4 weeks approximately. Another quarter turn, there it is. Another quarter turn shows it in Scorpio there, and one more quarter turn, and it's just behind the sun now. So then I'll have to go down to my day, and I'll just advance it enough. Went a little further there. So now I'm going to use hours. I'm just going to advance the moon 1 hour at a time. So this is the next upcoming new moon in Aquarius, by the way, at 27 degrees. There you can see it more precisely. It actually went over a little bit, so we can actually bring it down to minutes. This is how we correct birth times as well, by the way. It's a tool that can bring everything down to the minute with just a click. So it's a wonderful little advanced technology with this astrology charts and computers. Thank you very much. So the new moon that's going to occur in Aquarius on February 15th here will have the backdrop of planets different than the previous new moon. That's the most important takeaway here, is that you understand that every time there's a new moon, the backdrop of planets is significantly different, and each one of them have moved at least a little bit, at least by minutes, if not by degrees, depending on which ones you're dealing with. The far planets don't move very quickly from the standpoint of the Earth or in their orbit around the sun, but they do move. They're always in motion, and that is measurable, and of course is a forward and retrograde and all that process as well. So that's enough for today. I hope you enjoyed watching this, and I hope it gave you some further insight into the lunation cycle and how it plays a role in our lives as a vital theme of development, an evolutionary theme. And so one can, in getting an astrology chart done, you can, in doing a year forecast, it may be that the focus is on, it includes usually each month where the new moon occurs and what's implied. There's a lot of information it provides, by the way, to look at it that way. So there's other ways of measuring what's going to go on over the course of the year. So there's a lot of styles of approach that astrologers have in deciphering how to best tell you what's going on. But watching where each new moon occurs in sign, degree, and the house it falls in, and the aspects it makes to your chart will illustrate a developmental process destined for the year in question. So thanks for your time and attention, and I hope you enjoyed and learned from what I just showed you.